The northern world does not fall silent all at once. It happens slowly in measured, gentle increments, as if the landscape itself is exhaling a long, cold breath that settles across the grey water of the fjord. Along the rugged coastlines of 9th century Scandinavia, the late autumn winds, which once carried the salty spray of a restless sea, begin to lose their wildness. The waves, which for months crashed with a rhythmic thunder against the dark, jagged cliffs, grow heavy. It is a subtle transformation at first, a slight thickening of the water's edge where the liquid tide meets the stone. The surface of the sea begins to mirror the pale, overcast sky above, turning from a deep, vibrant blue into a smooth expanse of muted pewter. The air carries a new clarity, a crisp and biting purity that fills the lungs with every slow breath, signaling the arrival of a winter unlike any other in living memory. In the small coastal village tucked deep within the shelter of the bay, the change is watched with a quiet, observant reverence. The tall pines that drape the surrounding mountains stand motionless, their dark green needles dusted with the very first fine granules of dry, powdery snow. There is no sound from the forest, save for the occasional soft rustle of a branch releasing its white burden to the forest floor below. The world seems to be gathering its thoughts, preparing for a period of deep rest. Along the shoreline, the incoming tide no longer laps gently against the pebbles. Instead, it leaves behind thin, delicate rims of fragile crystal that crackle like parchment under the weight of the dropping temperature. These tiny formations grow with each passing hour, creeping outward from the shore, reaching across the surface of the water like the branches of a glass tree. As the sun dips low toward the horizon, hanging like a pale silver coin in the northern sky, the twilight stretches out, casting long soft shadows across the landscape. The light is gentle, a dim indigo hue that softens the sharp edges of the rocks and the timber frames of the longhouses. The smoke from the village fires rises perfectly straight into the calm air, a pale grey ribbon vanishing into the vast dusk. There is a deep, profound stillness that accompanies this gathering frost. It is a stillness that commands patience, an atmospheric pause that invites the mind to slow down and match the deliberate pace of the changing season. The great expanse of the fjord, which had been a bustling highway of travel and trade, is quietly transforming into a vast, unmoving mirror, locking the secrets of the deep water beneath a growing pane of pristine pale ice. The harbour, which once echoed with the rhythmic splash of heavy wooden oars and the vibrant chatter of returning seafaring men, now rests in an absolute unyielding calm. Tied securely to the heavy oak posts of the wooden piers, the longships sit perfectly still, their grand dragon-headed prows pointing toward the open mouth of the fjord. The water around them has ceased its movement entirely, freezing into a solid slate-grey sheet that embraces the dark timber hulls with a tight, unbreaking grip. The thick ropes of braided hemp, which once held these vessels against the pulling tides, hang slack and heavy, encrusted with a delicate layer of glittering hoarfrost that sparkles faintly in the dim winter light. Every line, every timber, and every iron rivet of the great ships is now traced by the fine white hand of the frost, turning the vessels into ghostly monuments of the past season. The massive sails of woven wool, striped with deep reds and natural creams, have been meticulously lowered, folded, and stored away within the dry holds beneath the deck planking. Without their canvas wings, the tall pine masts rise naked against the pale low sky, looking like a grove of bare trees standing in a frozen clearing. The small shields that usually line the gunwales have been removed and brought inside the longhouses, leaving the sides of the ship smooth and bare to face the biting northern elements. There is a peculiar beauty in this enforced rest. The longships, designed to ride the crests of stormy oceans and cut through the wildest waves, now look completely integrated into the landscape, as if they have sprouted directly from the ice sheet itself. The heavy oak planks, treated with dark pine tar, give off a faint, sweet and resinous aroma that lingers in the freezing air around the docks, a quiet reminder of the deep forests from which they were born. As the pale afternoon light fades into the deep blue of an extended northern twilight, the silence around the harbour grows even more profound. The ice continues to thicken around the wooden hulls, making low, deep groans that vibrate through the timber, a sound like the ships whispering to one another in their sleep. It is not an aggressive sound, but rather a slow structural settling, the natural adjustment of wood and water to the immense pressure of the cold. The villagers look out at their fleet from the shoreline, observing how the ice has formed a seamless highway around the vessels, completely erasing the boundary between land and sea. The ships, which were once the community's only connection to the wider world, have become stationary islands, blanketed by a thin layer of dry snow that softens their sharp silhouettes and hushes every footstep on the surrounding ice. Through the deepening blue of the winter twilight, Jarl Sigurd walks the snowy perimeter of the coastal settlement, his footsteps muffled into complete silence by the thick blanket of dry frost beneath his heavy leather boots. His long wool cloak, dyed a deep forest green and lined with dense sheepskin, brushes against the frozen stalks of tall grass that border the village path. He moves with a slow, deliberate cadence, his gaze resting upon the glowing windows of the longhouses, where faint wisps of yellow light leak through the shuttered openings. From within, the soft collective murmur of families gathering around their hearths can be heard, a comforting sound that contrasts sharply with the vast, chilly emptiness of the landscape outside. As a leader, Sigurd feels the profound weight of his responsibility resting upon his shoulders, a quiet burden that grows heavier with each degree the temperature drops. The regular trade routes that carved through the mountain passes are now completely choked with deep, impassable snowdrifts, and the sea, which had always been their reliable pantry, sits locked away under an ever-growing armour of solid ice. The usual supplies of grain, dried fruits, and preserved meats from neighbouring regions will not be arriving this season, leaving the village entirely dependent on what remains within their dark, wooden storehouses. Sigurd stops at the edge of the high rocky bluff that overlooks the frozen fjord, resting his calloused hand on the cold surface of an ancient boulder. He looks out over the grey expanse, his eyes tracking the pale lines of frost that crisscross the water like fractures in glass, knowing that traditional fishing boats cannot breach this barrier. Yet his expression remains calm and thoughtful, his mind turning not toward despair but toward adaptation, listening intently to the quiet rhythms of the winter landscape. The air is so still that his breath forms a steady rolling cloud of white mist before him, dissolving slowly into the freezing atmosphere like smoke. He understands that nature is not an enemy to be conquered, but an immense shifting force that requires a change in human perspective to navigate safely. The isolation of the village is total, but within that isolation lies a deep communal strength that has sustained his ancestors through countless dark winters before this one. Sigurd watches the first stars begin to prick through the velvet fabric of the northern sky, their distant light reflecting softly off the smooth, unyielding highway of ice below. He turns back toward the village with a quiet resolve, ready to guide his people into a new way of interacting with the frozen world. The channel is a storytelling platform created for entertainment, inspiration, education, and the promotion of relaxation and peaceful sleep. The visual transition of the Great Fjord is a masterpiece of slow, deliberate artistry painted by the northern winter, where once a roaring, deep blue expanse of restless saltwater surged against the coast, there now lies an endless, unyielding highway of white frost and pale grey ice. The transformation is so complete that the boundary where the dark, rocky shoreline used to meet the lapping waves has been completely softened and erased by thick, undulating drifts of snow. The sea has lost its voice of crashing surf and tumbling pebbles, replacing it with a subtle, melodic language of its own. It is a quiet symphony of low, resonant clicks and long, structural hums that travel for miles across the smooth expanse, sounding like the deep, rhythmic breathing of a sleeping giant. When the morning light touches the ice, the surface does not simply reflect the sky, it absorbs and transforms the pale sunbeams into a kaleidoscope of soft, icy hues. Near the base of the towering cliffs, where the shadows linger long into the day, the ice carries a deep, translucent sapphire tone, hinting at the immense depth of the water trapped beneath. Further out toward the center of the channel, the surface brightens into a brilliant cream and pearlescent white, where the wind has swept the dry snow into smooth, aerodynamic ridges that look like the frozen waves of a stationary ocean. The vastness of this new landscape alters the perception of distance entirely, making the distant mountains seem closer, linked to the village by this solid, unbreaking bridge of winter stone. Walking along the very edge of this frozen expanse, one can observe the intricate patterns frozen forever into the upper layers of the ice. Tiny air bubbles caught mid-rise when the sudden freeze gripped the water are suspended like strings of delicate pearls in the glass-like depths. Fine, geometric fractures glowing with an inner white light spiderweb across the surface, demonstrating the incredible strength and tension of the frozen sheet. The air above the ice remains perfectly clear and perfectly still, so clear that the sound of a lone raven's wingbeat high above can be heard with absolute clarity. The fjord has become a sanctuary of peace, a vast white plain that invites the mind to drift across its smooth, undisturbed surface, finding comfort in the absolute stability of a world held in winter's gentle embrace. Inside the thick timber walls of the village longhouses, the world contracts into a small, warm circle of flickering orange light. The heavy wooden doors, insulated with dense layers of matted sheep's wool and sealed with iron latches, bar the entry of the biting northern wind that sweeps across the outer plains. High above, the soot-stained rafters of the roof hold the rising warmth, while long, dried bundles of mountain herbs, thyme, wild chamomile, and sweet marjoram hang gently from the cedar beams, releasing a faint, earthy perfume as the heat coaxes out their summer oils. The family sit together upon low benches covered in thick badger and bear pelts, their movements slow and relaxed, matching the sleepy rhythm of the midwinter season. At the centre of the longhouse, the great stone hearth serves as the living heart of the home. Heavy logs of seasoned birch and resinous pine burn slowly, their embers glowing with a deep, pulsing crimson that hums with a steady, comforting heat. The sound of the fire is a constant, gentle companion, a rhythmic crackle as the dry wood splits, accompanied by the soft, rhythmic sigh of the draught, drawing the smoke upward through the small opening in the roof. Outside, the northern wind begins its nightly patrol, throwing handfuls of fine dry snow against the thick wooden shutters with a soft brushing sound that mimics the falling of autumn leaves. Rather than causing alarm, the howling of the elements outside only deepens the profound sense of sanctuary and safety shared by those gathered around the glowing embers. In the corners of the room, the large earthenware storage jars stand in quiet rows, containing the remaining supplies of salted lard, dried roots, and grains. The elders tell ancient stories in low, melodic tones, their voices rising and falling like the distant tide, weaving tales of old gods and distant lands to keep the minds of the young occupied and calm. Every gesture inside the longhouse is deliberate and peaceful. The spinning of wool on wooden spindles makes a faint, whirring hum, while the steady scraping of a horn spoon against a wooden bowl marks the sharing of the evening meal. It is a time of waiting, a communal hibernation where the scarcity of the stores is met not with anxiety but with a deep, quiet patience, trusting in the ancient walls and the steady warmth of the hearth to see them through to the dawn. The deep midnight hour arrives with a majestic, profound stillness that wraps itself around the coastal settlement like a velvet shroud. Jarl Sigurd stands entirely alone upon the dark, rocky shoreline, his tall figure motionless against the vast, pale expanse of the frozen fjord. The air has cooled to a sharp crystal purity, completely devoid of moisture, allowing every distant sound to carry for miles across the level plain of ice. He rests his gloved hands upon the hilt of his sheathed sword, not out of a desire for conflict, but out of a lifelong habit of readiness, feeling the cold metal through the thick layers of tanned deer hide. His breathing is slow and perfectly regular, each exhale creating a soft, brief cloud of white mist that drifts lazily upward before vanishing into the clear, starlit sky. High above the towering peaks of the surrounding mountains, the celestial dome opens up in a breathtaking display of cosmic brilliance. Thousands of ancient stars, burning with a cold, silver intensity, prick through the deep indigo fabric of the night, their arrangement unchanged for generations. Sigurd looks down from the heavens and observes a wondrous phenomenon. The smooth, glass-like surface of the locked water acts as an immense dark mirror, reflecting the constellations with an absolute unmoving clarity. It is as if he is standing between two identical universes of light, one arching high above his head and the other stretching out infinitely beneath his feet. The line where the horizon once separated the sky from the sea has completely dissolved, creating an atmosphere of weightless suspension, a tranquil space where time itself seems to have paused its relentless march. The immense sheet of ice beneath him remains perfectly stable, yet it possesses a subtle vitality that can only be felt through absolute silence. As he listens, a faint low-frequency hum vibrates through the soles of his boots, a deep, resonant tone that rises from the dark water miles out in the center of the bay. It is the voice of the ocean moving beneath its winter shield, a reassurance that the life of the sea has not been extinguished, but merely sheltered from the biting frost. Sigurd closes his eyes for a brief moment, letting the rhythmic, distant sound ground his thoughts, feeling a deep, spiritual connection to the timeless endurance of the land. All stories presented on this channel are global historical tales, gently curated and narrated based on themes such as the rise and fall of nations, human cultures, and extraordinary journeys through time. The morning brings no sun, only a soft pearlescent glow that filters evenly through a high canopy of thin, milky clouds. Taking his first steps away from the solid stone of the shoreline, Jarl Sigurd ventures out onto the open ice sheet of the fjord, testing the strength of the winter crust with each deliberate stride. The surface is incredibly solid, a thick pavement of ancient water that has transformed into a resilient slate of cold stone. A light dust of fresh, powdery snow from the previous night covers the ice like a fine velvet cloth, muffling the sound of his movements. He walks several hundred paces out from the docks, until the long houses of his village appear as small dark shapes nestled against the base of the white cliffs. Stopping in a wide open clearing where the wind has swept the snow thin, Sigurd kneels down on one knee, his wool cloak pooling softly around him on the frozen surface. Using the heavy gloved palm of his hand, he begins to clear away the fine layer of dry snow, brushing it aside in long rhythmic sweeps. As the white powder is wiped away, it reveals the true face of the ice beneath, a deep, dark, and translucent window of solid crystal. He leans closer, placing his hands on either side of the cleared patch to block the ambient glare of the sky. Looking straight down through several feet of pale green-tinted ice, his eyes adjust to the dim light of the aquatic world below. There, in the quiet depths far beneath the frozen crust, he catches a glimpse of a world that has refused to freeze. The deep ocean water moves with a silent, fluid grace completely independent of the stagnant winter world above. He can see the faint undulating ribbons of dark kelp swaying gently in the subsurface currents, their long fronds moving like silk in a slow breeze. More importantly, he notices the quick silver flash of life. A school of small fish darting through the shadows, their scales catching the faint light that filters through the ice. The sight fills him with a sudden, profound sense of wonder and relief. The surface of the world may be locked in an unyielding sleep, but underneath, the great heart of the fjord is still beating, full of movement, life, and untapped abundance. Returning to the village with a renewed sense of purpose, Jarl Sigurd seeks out the one place where summer's fierce heat still lingers, the village smithy. The forge is a sturdy structure built of thick black river stones and heavy oak timbers, located close to the hillside to shield it from the biting sea winds. Inside, the atmosphere is heavy with the rich, comforting scents of burning charcoal, warm iron, and the sharp tang of mineral oils. The village blacksmith, a man whose hands are as weathered and strong as the roots of an old oak, stands before the glowing hearth of the forge. He is in no hurry. His movements are measured and calm, a patient dance with the elements of fire and earth that has been perfected over decades of quiet labor. The charcoal bed inside the forge glows with a brilliant, pulsing orange light that casts long, dancing shadows across the tool-lined walls. Using heavy iron tongs, the blacksmith lifts a thick piece of unformed iron from the embers, its surface radiating a soft golden heat that pushes back the chill of the room. He places the glowing metal onto the massive anvil, and the rhythmic song of the smithy begins. The steady, deliberate blow of the hammer against the hot iron produces a clear musical ring that echoes through the quiet, cold morning air of the village. It is a comforting, industrious sound, a steady heartbeat that signals to the community that work is happening, that preparation is underway, and that the long winter has not broken their spirit. With great care, the smith shapes the iron not into weapons of war, but into heavy, broad-bladed axes designed specifically to contest the absolute rule of the frost. The edges are hammered thin but left remarkably thick near the eye of the blade, providing the weight necessary to fracture the stubborn ice without sticking. Once the shape is perfect, the blacksmith plunges the hot iron into a deep wooden vat of cold brine. A loud, sharp hiss fills the room, accompanied by a thick cloud of white steam that smells of salt and iron, rising gracefully toward the dark rafters. This tempering process locks the strength into the metal, making it hard enough to bite into the frozen fjord without dulling, preparing the tools that will soon unlock the hidden life of the deep water. The midday sky remains a vast canopy of muted pearl as Jarl Sigurd returns to the cleared patch of ice carrying the newly forged iron axe. The heavy wooden shaft, carved from the dense heartwood of an ancient ash tree, feels solid and reliable in his grip, its surface sanded smooth to prevent the cold from biting through his thick leather mitts. A small group of village elders and hunters follows him at a respectful distance, their footsteps making a light, crunching sound on the powdery snow. They stand in a silent circle, their expressions calm and watchful, sensing the quiet importance of this moment. The vast fjord stretches out around them, an immense white plain of absolute stillness that seems to dare anyone to disrupt its ancient winter sleep. Sigurd takes a wide, stable stance on the translucent ice, his eyes fixed on the dark green-tinted window he had uncovered hours before. He lifts the heavy axe slowly, his movements deliberate and unhurried, matching the slow rhythm of the northern landscape. With a measured exhalation that forms a sudden cloud of white mist, he brings the broad iron blade down against the frozen surface. The impact produces a sharp, resonant crack, a dry musical tone that breaks the absolute silence of the bay like a bell striking the hour. The heavy iron does not shatter the ice instantly. Instead, it leaves a bright white, star-shaped bruise embedded deep within the clear crystal structure, showing the incredible density of the winter shield. Without rushing, Sigurd lifts the axe once more, establishing a slow, meditative cadence. Blow after blow, the iron bites into the same spot, creating a rhythmic, hollow thud that reverberates across the empty expanse of the fjord, echoing off the distant stone cliffs like a distant heartbeat. Small, glassy shards of ice fly upward, tumbling gracefully across the white snow like scattered diamonds catching the dim afternoon light. With every steady strike, the blade sinks a fraction deeper, carving out a neat rectangular groove into the frozen crust. The physical effort sends a wave of natural, comforting warmth through Sigurd's body, dispelling the chill of the northern air and demonstrating to those watching that even the most stubborn frost must eventually yield to patience and purposeful labor. The music of the first strike acts as a silent beacon, drawing more villagers out from the smoky warmth of the longhouses and onto the vast white plain of the fjord. They come carrying their own tools, heavy iron chisels, old wood-splitting axes, and long pine poles tipped with sharpened metal, their movements unhurried and peaceful, like people responding to a familiar morning call. There is no frantic rush, no shouting through the frosty air. The community understands the nature of the task ahead, recognizing that haste has no place when confronting the patient strength of the winter. They spread out along the ice sheet in a wide, orderly line, leaving ample space between one another, their silhouettes dark and clear against the immense pearlescent background of the frozen water. Soon, the single, solitary ring of Jarl Sigurd's axe is joined by a chorus of matching tones, establishing a slow, meditative cadence that completely breaks the winter's absolute silence. The sound is complex and beautiful, a layered symphony of high crystalline rings, deep hollow thuds, and the soft, dry rustle of ice shavings being swept aside by heavy leather boots. The rhythm is not hurried, it is a pace designed for endurance, a steady swing and a measured breath, repeated over and over until the movement becomes as natural as walking. As the villagers work side by side, the collective mist of their breath rises upward, merging into a single, low-hanging cloud of white vapor that hovers peacefully over the working party, glowing softly in the dim northern light. The physical labor begins to weave a profound sense of unity and comfort across the frozen bay. The initial feelings of isolation and vulnerability that had gripped the village since the Great Freeze began melt away, replaced by the reassuring presence of shared effort. Neighbors catch each other's eyes through the mist, exchanging small, knowing nods of encouragement that require no words. The rhythmic thumping of the iron tools vibrates through the ice, sending a subtle, pulsing energy through the soles of their boots, as if the village itself is generating its own warmth to counter the deep chill of the atmosphere. With every steady blow, the people reclaim their relationship with the fjord, transforming the terrifying ice barrier into a communal workspace where patience and cooperation pave the way for survival. After hours of steady, rhythmic labor, the first complete breakthrough is achieved. With a final deep strike of a heavy iron chisel, the bottom of the carved trench gives way, and a sudden quiet gush of liquid seawater wells upward to fill the opening. The villagers step back, pausing their tools to admire the result of their collective patience. Carved out of the thick winter crust are several neat, geometric apertures, perfect rectangles and clean squares that puncture the white surface of the fjord like dark jewels set into a silver shield. The edges of these openings are remarkably smooth, showing the incredible density of the ice layers, which resemble sheets of polished green glass when viewed from the side. Looking down into these newly opened vents, the contrast is visually stunning. Surrounded by the pristine, blinding white of the surface snow, the exposed water of the deep fjord appears almost black, a deep, rich, and mysterious obsidian color that drinks the pale light of the winter sky. The water does not surge or splash aggressively. Instead, it rises to a level just a few inches below the surface of the ice, and rests there perfectly calm and perfectly still, like liquid velvet. The surface of these small dark pools reflects the high milky clouds above with a mirror-like clarity, creating the illusion of small, open windows looking into another night sky hidden deep within the earth. The opening of these apertures allows the faint, ancient scent of the deep sea to escape into the frozen air, a clean, sharp aroma of mineral salt, cold kelp, and fresh currents that cuts through the dry, stagnant smell of the winter frost. It is a sensory reminder of the vast, unchanging world that thrives beneath the temporary seasonal barrier. The water inside the squares gently rises and falls in a slow, almost imperceptible rhythm, responding to the massive, unseen tides that continue to pull across the open ocean miles away. If you find comfort in these quiet journeys through the histories of the world, please take a moment to gently support the channel by liking this story, sharing it with someone who seeks rest, and subscribing to join our peaceful community for more nightly voyages. While the cutters maintain their rhythmic cadence out on the open ice, a different kind of preparation takes place within the sheltered alcoves of the village boathouses. These long timber structures, smelling deeply of old salt, seasoned spruce and dried resin, provide a quiet sanctuary from the biting outdoor air. Here, the elder weavers of the village sit on low wooden stools, their spectacles casting faint shadows in the soft candlelight as they tend to the communal fishing nets. These nets, meticulously woven by hand over many seasons from coarse, multi-ply hemp twine, were originally designed to be cast from the decks of moving longships into the rolling summer waves. Now they must be adapted for a much more delicate and restrictive environment. The weavers work with a practiced, meditative slowness, their fingers moving gracefully through the web of thick fibers like spiders repairing a web after a storm. They carefully inspect every knot and mesh, ensuring that the long weeks of storage have not weakened the structural integrity of the twine. To make the nets suitable for sub-ice harvesting, the elders begin altering the traditional weight distribution along the bottom lines. Instead of using the large, jagged stones typically employed to drag the nets deep into the open sea, they select exceptionally smooth, rounded river stones collected from the mountain streams before the autumn freeze. These stones, polished to a silky texture by centuries of rushing water, are wrapped securely in small pouches of tanned leather and tied to the lower hemp ropes at precise measured intervals. The use of these smooth, cylindrical stones is a testament to the village's deep understanding of their environment. When lowered through the narrow apertures in the ice, These weights must glide effortlessly without catching on the jagged crystal underlayers of the frozen crust. The top lines of the nets are fitted with carved floats made from the lightweight, porous bark of mountain birch trees, ensuring they will hug the ceiling of the ice where certain species of fish seek shelter from the deeper currents. The entire process is a quiet ritual of adaptation, a transformation of tools that honors the change in the natural world. Every knot tied and every stone secured is an act of quiet confidence, a physical manifestation of the community's belief that patience and careful craftsmanship will always find a way through the hardest winter. The afternoon light begins to soften into a deep hazy lavender as the villagers bring the modified nets out to the line of carved ice squares. To deploy these heavy webs of hemp beneath a solid sheet of ice several feet thick, they must utilize an ancient, meticulous technique that requires absolute coordination and a slow, steady patience. The primary tools for this task are long, slender poles carved from young spruce trees, chosen for their remarkable flexibility and lightweight strength. These poles, stripped entirely of their bark and sanded until they are perfectly smooth, are bound together end to end with tight leather thongs, creating a single, continuous wooden rod that stretches nearly 60 paces in length. At the first ice aperture, a young hunter carefully attaches a long, lightweight guide rope made of braided horsehair to the tip of the wooden pole. With measured care, he slides the pole horizontally through the opening, pushing it flat against the dark underside of the ice sheet, guiding it carefully toward the next carved square down the line. The process is blind, relying entirely on the tactile feedback traveling up the wooden shaft and the visual cues filtering through the translucent green ice. A second villager stands at the next hole, peering down into the dark water, waiting patiently until the pale tip of the spruce pole glides into view beneath the opening, looking like a pale shadow moving through dense glass. Using a long bone hook, the second villager gently catches the guide rope, pulling a loop of the braided horsehair up out of the freezing water while the first pole is slowly retrieved. This delicate sequence is repeated from hole to hole, threading the guide line under the unyielding ice ceiling like a giant needle passing through cloth. The work cannot be rushed. A single sudden jerk or careless pull could snap the horsehair line against a sharp crystal ridge underneath, forcing them to begin the entire process anew. The air is so quiet that the faint, scraping sound of the wooden pole sliding against the smooth underface of the ice can be heard clearly by everyone on the surface, a soft, scratching rhythm that speaks of a community working in perfect, silent harmony with the elements. Beneath the dense, unyielding shield of the frozen fjord, a completely different world exists, one of absolute serenity and fluid grace. While the surface of the northern earth is lashed by freezing gales and blanketed in thick, dry snowdrifts, the deep ocean water remains entirely undisturbed by the howling blizzards above. Down here, far removed from the sharp bite of the winter air, the massive marine currents flow with a slow, majestic smoothness, tracking the same ancient pathways they have followed for thousands of years. The water is incredibly clear, purified by the cold and shielded from the churning winds, creating a vast, silent sanctuary of deep indigo and soft, filtered emerald light. The thick ceiling of ice acts as a grand, insulating roof, trapping the residual warmth of the deep ocean and creating a stable, predictable climate for the creatures that dwell within. The long, undulating fronds of deep-sea kelp, rooted firmly to the rocky floor of the fjord, sway back and forth in a gentle rhythmic dance, their dark amber ribbons catching the faint, ethereal light that leaks down through the translucent ice sheet. There is no sound in this aquatic kingdom save for the low, comforting murmur of the massive tide as it shifts weightlessly against the underwater cliffs. It is a space of profound peace, a hidden cradle of life that continues to breathe and move with a steady, quiet pulse, completely indifferent to the harsh seasonal changes taking place in the world of air and stone. As the guide ropes and long spruce poles glide silently through this upper layer of water, they disturb nothing but the smallest particles of floating sea drift, which sparkle briefly like dust motes in a sunbeam before settling back into the dark. The native fish of the fjord, large, slow-moving cod with mottled silver scales, and deep-water herring swim easily through the calm currents, their gills pulsing with a slow, regular cadence that mirrors the tranquility of their environment. They do not fight the movement of the tide. Instead, they allow the fluid highways to carry them gently along, finding an abundance of small nutrients trapped just beneath the frozen ceiling. This hidden world serves as a timeless reminder that even during the longest, coldest winters, a deep and unbreaking vitality continues to flow just out of sight, waiting patiently to be discovered. With the braided guideline securely threaded between the carved apertures, the moment arrives to introduce the heavy hemp nets to the hidden waters of the fjord. Jarl Sigurd stands at the primary ice hole, his large hands guiding the bunched fabric of the net with a gentle, patient precision. The process is a masterpiece of deliberate, synchronized movement, as the villagers at the far end of the line pull steadily on the horsehair guide ropes. Sigurd and his companions slowly feed the net into the dark pool. The coarse hemp fibers, stiffened slightly by the outdoor air, soften instantly as they submerge, absorbing the cold salt water and expanding into their true, functional form beneath the frozen pavement. The net descends through the narrow opening with a soft liquid sigh, vanishing into the deep obsidian water like a shadow dissolving into the night. The smooth river stones, bound in their protective leather pouches along the lower lines, fulfill their purpose perfectly. They glide downward without a single catch, dragging the lower hem of the mesh into the calm depths with a steady, uniform weight that ensures the net hangs straight and true. On the surface, the carved birch bark floats follow closely behind, sliding smoothly beneath the ice ceiling where they trap small pockets of air, holding the top edge of the net firmly against the glass-like roof of the sub-ice world. The deployment happens in near total silence, broken only by the rhythmic creak of wet hemp sliding over the smoothed edges of the ice blocks, and the occasional soft plop of a float entering the water. There is no urgency in the work. Each foot of mesh is inspected one last time as it slips from the surface, ensuring that no twists or tangles disrupt the wide, invisible wall now taking shape in the currents below. Once the entire net is submerged, stretching like a translucent curtain across the path of the underwater tides, the villagers tie the thick anchoring lines to heavy wooden stakes frozen solid into the ice sheet. The trap is set, suspended perfectly in the calm sanctuary of the deep sea, and a collective feeling of quiet accomplishment settles over the frozen bay as the light begins to wane. The work of deployment completed, the village enters a period of profound, meditative waiting. A quiet stillness descends upon the open expanse of the frozen fjord as the afternoon light matures into a soft, monochromatic haze. The villagers do not retreat instantly to the longhouses. Instead, many choose to remain on the ice, gathering in small, quiet clusters near the edge of the shore. They sit upon low wooden sledges lined with thick deerskins, their movements minimal, their voices reduced to low, rhythmic whispers that are instantly swallowed by the vast emptiness of the white landscape. Time seems to lose its sharp edges during these long hours, stretching out into a seamless continuation of the cold, pale day. Without the ticking of mechanical clocks, the passage of the afternoon is tracked solely by the slow, imperceptible movement of shadows across the snow. The long blue silhouettes of the towering pine trees on the western cliffs begin to creep outward, extending like dark, elegant fingers across the white plain of the fjord. Each hour is marked by a fraction of an inch of shadow growth, a silent clockwork that requires absolute stillness to observe. A fine, delicate snow begins to fall from the high, milky canopy, not a roaring blizzard, but a gentle drifting dust of tiny crystals that float through the air like frozen stardust, settling softly upon the wool cloaks and fur hoods of the waiting people. There is a unique comfort in this communal patience, a shared understanding that some things cannot be hurried by human will. The net sits deep below them, a silent harvester working in a world completely hidden from their sight, and all they can do is trust in the craftsmanship of their elders and the natural bounty of the sea. The breath of the waiting villagers rises and falls in slow, steady unison, creating tiny, fleeting clouds of warmth that vanish into the frosty atmosphere. The immense cold of the northern winter becomes less of a hostile force and more of a grand, quiet sanctuary, an atmospheric chamber that isolates the mind from the anxieties of the past and the future, locking the present moment in a state of pure, undisturbed tranquility. The long period of waiting draws to a close as the deep indigo shadows of the western cliffs finally stretch across the line of carved apertures. Jarl Sigurd stands at the primary hole, his large hands reaching down to grasp the thick anchoring lines that connect to the submerged net. The braided horsehair and coarse hemp ropes have grown stiff in the freezing air above the water, coated in a fine, glittering layer of frost that crackles softly at his touch. He gives a slow, firm tug, testing the tension of the line, feeling the heavy, rhythmic drag that signals the net is full. With a quiet nod to the line of waiting villagers, the collection process begins, handled with the same measured slowness that has guided every step of this winter venture. The villagers take their positions in a long, orderly line behind Sigurd, each person placing their hands on the coarse ropes at precise intervals. As they lean back together, pulling with a steady, uniform strength, the wet hemp ropes slide across the smoothed, icy edges of the carved squares. The friction produces a distinct, melodic creaking sound, a rhythmic wooden groan that echoes across the quiet expanse of the frozen bay like the mast of a longship straining in a gentle breeze. This sound is the only disruption in the vast winter silence, a comforting industrial cadence that tells everyone the harvest is moving. The work is physically demanding, yet no one rushes. They maintain a deliberate, steady pace that protects the hemp from snapping against the sharp ice under layers. As the first few yards of the net break the dark surface of the pool, water cascades off the braided twine in a soft musical patter, freezing almost instantly into tiny, glass-like beads upon the surrounding snow. The dark obsidian water inside the square begins to churn gently, broken by the slow rise of the heavy mesh. The villagers continue their rhythmic pull, their breaths rising in unison like synchronized white-plumed clouds in the chilly air. With every foot of rope retrieved, the tension grows, and the anticipation among the silent watchers deepens. The smooth river stones that served as weights glide up through the aperture, clearing the rim effortlessly without catching, a testament to the careful craftsmanship of the village elders who prepared the lines in the quiet of the boathouse. The rhythmic creaking of the hemp lines reaches a gentle crescendo as the main belly of the submerged net approaches the surface of the carved aperture. With one final, coordinated pull from the line of villagers, the first true harvest breaches the dark obsidian-coloured pool, emerging from the mysterious depths of the fjord into the pale winter light. Spilling out across the pristine white canvas of the snow-covered ice comes a magnificent cascade of life. Thousands of silver-scaled fish, primary herring and deep-water cod, their sleek bodies gleaming with a brilliant, pearlescent intensity that cuts through the monochromatic grey of the afternoon. The sight is visually stunning, an explosion of bright metallic luster scattered across a field of pure, untouched white. The fish lie softly upon the thick snow crust, their movements minimal and slow, quickly sedated by the intense calming chill of the northern air. Their brilliant scales catch the low diffused rays of the hidden sun, reflecting soft hues of lavender, pale blue, and iridescent green like a collection of living jewels freshly mined from the belly of the sea. There is no frantic splashing or chaotic noise. The cold handles the transition with a quiet, merciful swiftness, preserving the absolute peace that has defined the entire day. The sheer volume of the catch fills the carved opening, a continuous stream of silver wealth that demonstrates the incredible, hidden abundance that had been thriving completely out of sight beneath the frozen armor of the bay. The village elders and children step forward with low baskets woven from flexible willow branches, their expressions filled with a quiet, reverent gratitude as they begin to gather the silver harvest. Each fish is handled with care, lifted from the snow with thick leather mittens, and placed gently into the baskets, their frozen scales making a light, metallic clinking sound like coins tumbling into a chest. Jarl Sigurd stands at the center of the workspace, watching the baskets fill with a profound sense of relief washing over his heart. The terrifying spectre of the winter famine, which had haunted the longhouses since the first hard freeze, vanishes in an instant, replaced by the beautiful, shimmering reality of a community that looked beneath its problems and found its salvation. As the heavy wicker baskets fill to their brims with the silver harvest, a new sensory atmosphere envelopes the working site on the ice. The opening of the deep fjord and the sudden emergence of the catch releases a vast, clean aroma that spreads peacefully across the white landscape. It is the authentic breath of the ocean, a rich, deep scent of mineral salt, cold kelp forests, and ancient underwater currents that breaks through the sharp, dry stillness of the winter air. This oceanic perfume mixes perfectly with the natural scent of the surrounding landscape, where the crisp, biting purity of the northern frost carries the faint, resinous note of frozen pine needles from the mountain slopes above. Every breath taken by the working villagers feels incredibly refreshing, a sharp and cold tonic that cuts through the stagnant warmth and wood smoke of the longhouses, filling the lungs with an absolute clarity. The air is so pure and still that the scents do not dissipate quickly. They linger close to the carved ice squares, creating a localized sanctuary that smells of vitality and endurance. The fine, powdery snow continuing to drift down from the milky sky absorbs the ambient moisture, keeping the atmosphere dry and crisp, which prevents the cold from feeling damp or heavy. It is an environment that sharpens the senses while simultaneously calming the mind, a space where the simple act of breathing becomes a conscious connection to the natural world. The villagers move through this aromatic mist with a slow, relaxed efficiency, their physical movements perfectly attuned to the peaceful environment. The steam from their mouths mixes with the faint cold vapor rising from the open water, creating tiny shifting clouds of white mist that hover over the silver piles of fish like protective veils. There is a deep, instinctual comfort in these scents. For generations, the smell of the salt sea has meant life, security, and continuity for the coastal clans. To experience that familiar aroma now, in the very heart of an unprecedented freeze, is a profound reassurance that the essential order of their world remains unbroken, and that winter is merely a temporary phase in the eternal cycle of the far north. A beautiful paradox unfolds across the frozen surface of the fjord as the afternoon transitions into a deep, velvety twilight. Despite the dropping temperatures and the steady, silent fall of fine snow crystals, the physical labor of the harvest brings a natural, comforting warmth back to the bodies of the working villagers. The continuous, measured exertion, bending to pull the heavy hemp lines, lifting the willow baskets, and clearing the fresh snow from the edges of the apertures, ignites an internal fire that safely counters the biting northern air. It is not a frantic, exhausting heat, but a slow, glowing vitality that spreads from the core out to the tips of the fingers, keeping the cold completely at bay. Hands that had been stiff and numb from weeks of quiet isolation inside the dim longhouses now find their strength renewed as they grip the coarse fibers of the wet ropes. The thick leather mittens, lined with dense sheep's wool and rubbed with waterproofing lard, trap this natural body heat perfectly, keeping the skin supple and warm even when touching the icy scales of the silver fish. The heavy wool tunics and cloaks, layered carefully to allow air to circulate, create a private microclimate of comfort for each individual, turning the open ice sheet into an unexpectedly hospitable workspace. The rhythm of the labor has become so natural and steady that it requires little conscious thought, allowing the mind to rest in a state of calm, meditative focus while the body moves with a gentle, purposeful energy. This physical warmth is mirrored by a profound emotional lifting that ripples through the entire community. The shared effort of the harvest dissolves the lingering anxieties of the winter, replacing them with the deep satisfaction of cooperative survival. As neighbors pass heavy baskets down the line, their hands brush against one another, exchanging brief moments of human warmth that are far more effective than any hearth fire. The heavy, dark weight that had settled over the village since the harbor's first froze solid has been completely broken, replaced by a light, active industry that transforms the hostile Arctic winter into a seasonal backdrop for shared human resilience. As the long wooden sledges are piled high with the gleaming silver catch, Jarl Sigurd pauses for a brief moment, resting his hands on the smooth handle of his ashwood pole. He looks out over the wide, bustling workspace that has formed on the ice, watching his people move with a calm, unhurried grace through the soft purple twilight. A profound realization settles into his mind, as clear and steady as the frost that anchors the longships to the pier. He understands now that survival in this harsh northern world does not always mean fighting the elements or wishing for a change in the weather. True leadership lies in learning to change one's own perspective, looking past the terrifying barriers of nature to find the deep, silent abundance that remains hidden beneath them. The great ice sheet, which just days ago had looked like a massive, unyielding shield designed to starve his village, has been transformed into a dependable floor, a grand, white highway that supports their weight and connects them directly to the bounty of the deep. By laying down their weapons of iron and picking up the axes of the cutter, the community has stepped into harmony with the rhythm of the winter, rather than wasting their energy in a useless struggle against it. The dark obsidian pools inside the carved squares are no longer symbols of isolation. They are open doorways to a hidden sanctuary of life that flows steadily, completely untouched by the frozen winds of the world above. Sigurd feels a deep sense of peace washing over him, a quiet warmth that matches the glowing embers of the longhouses on the shore. He knows that this lesson will outlive the current freeze, becoming a new piece of wisdom to anchor the spirits of his people for generations to come. If you find peace and relaxation in these quiet journeys through the ancient pathways of human history, please take a soft moment to subscribe to the channel, like this narrative, and share it with those who seek a calm space to rest their minds before sleep. With the success of the first harvest, the initial uncertainty that had hung over the village vanishes completely, replaced by a deep, stabilizing rhythm. The daily process of checking and clearing the ice nets quickly transforms into a peaceful, reliable ritual that provides a welcome structure to the long, dark days of the northern winter. Every morning, as the pale sky transitions from a deep indigo into a soft, hazy grey, a dedicated group of villagers moves out onto the fjord with a quiet, practiced efficiency. There is no need for loud commands or hurried discussions. Each person knows their place in the sequence, and their movements have become as smooth and fluid as the currents flowing beneath their feet. The routine begins at the same hour each day, creating a sense of predictability that brings immense comfort to the community. First, the night's accumulation of fine, crystalline ice must be gently chipped away from the edges of the carved apertures using long iron chisels. The sound of the metal tapping against the frost is light and musical, a clear, rhythmic clicking that serves as the morning bell for the coastal settlement. Once the dark obsidian pools are cleared, the villagers take hold of the heavy hemp lines, leaning back in unison to pull the nets upward with a slow, measured cadence that respects the limits of the fibers and the strength of their own bodies. This daily encounter with the fjord becomes a form of communal meditation, a quiet space where the mind can rest while the body engages in purposeful, repetitive labor. The physical environment remains intensely cold, but the predictability of the task creates an internal sanctuary of safety and confidence. The villagers look forward to these hours on the ice, away from the enclosed smoke of the longhouses, enjoying the sharp clarity of the winter air and the simple, profound satisfaction of providing for their loved ones. As the heavy willow baskets are loaded with the morning's silver catch, the community recognizes that the great freeze is no longer an enemy to be feared, but a demanding, yet generous partner in their seasonal journey. As the daily routine settles into the community, the physical workspace on the fjord begins to develop its own stunning visual landscape. The continuous pulling of the heavy hemp nets coaxes small amounts of liquid saltwater up through the apertures, where it splashes softly against the rectangular rims before draining back into the deep. In the intense, still air of the northern winter, these droplets do not remain liquid for long. They freeze almost instantly upon contact with the frozen pavement, gradually building up into beautiful raised collars of clear, solid crystal that frame each dark obsidian pool like a precious border of sculpted glass. The architecture of these ice holes changes with every passing day, shaped by the unique combination of the salt spray, the falling snow, and the quiet movement of the workers. The edges become remarkably smooth and rounded, losing their sharp, chiseled corners and transforming into fluid, organic shapes that resemble frozen water lilies floating on a white field. When the weak, filtered light of the midday sky passes through these glass-like collars, it undergoes a beautiful refraction, splitting into subtle ribbons of pale emerald, deep aquamarine, and soft silver that glow with an inner luminosity. The frozen structures look like tiny, intricate palaces built by the frost to protect the entries to the sub-ice world. Looking closely at the surrounding snow crust, one can see where the fine blowing powder has mixed with the splashing salt water, freezing into delicate, crystalline patterns that resemble the intricate lace woven by the village elders. These miniature frost formations spiderweb outward from the holes in long, elegant tendrils, catching the dry, floating flakes that continue to fall from the high, milky canopy. The entire site takes on a sacred, untouched quality, a gallery of ephemeral winter art that stands as a silent witness to the village's industry. The beauty of these formations deepens the sense of peace that blankets the bay, turning a place of survival into a sanctuary of quiet wonder where the mind can wander endlessly through the infinite geometries of the frost. Once the morning's silver harvest is fully pulled from the dark obsidian depths, the focus of the community transitions smoothly from extraction to distribution. The large willow baskets, bulging with the weight of gleaming deep-water cod and salt-scented herring, are lifted with a quiet, synchronized effort and settled onto long wooden sledges. These sledges, constructed from the resilient timber of young ash trees and fitted with wide polished runners, are designed to slide effortlessly across the packed snow crust of the fjord. There is no frantic shouting or hoarding of the resource. Under the watchful, calm guidance of Jarl Sigurd, the bounty is treated as a shared blessing, belonging equally to every hearth fire that burns along the frozen coastline. A small procession of young men and elders takes hold of the leather-pulling harnesses, moving with a slow, rhythmic stride that keeps the heavy sledges gliding smoothly across the white plain. The runners make a soft, singing hiss as they cut through the dry powder, a peaceful sound that matches the quiet atmosphere of the winter afternoon. They travel from house to house, stopping at each timber doorway along the shore to deliver a generous portion of the fresh catch. Even the most isolated cabins, nestled high up on the rocky bluffs where the elderly and the infirm reside, are visited with meticulous care, ensuring that no member of the clan is left to face the cold with an empty pantry. The act of sharing the wealth becomes a beautiful, unifying ritual that warms the village from the inside out. As the sledges arrive at each home, the heavy wooden doors swing open, releasing brief currents of warm, smoky air that smell of roasted pine and old wool. The expressions of gratitude from the families are delivered in low, emotional tones, a gentle squeeze of a gloved hand, a quiet word of blessing, or a simple nod of profound relief. This systematic generosity completely erases the invisible walls of fear and isolation that the Great Freeze had tried to build between neighbors, weaving the separate households back into a single, unbreakable fabric of human cooperation and care. As the last of the wooden sledges completes its rounds through the snowy paths of the village, the twilight deepens into a rich, velvety violet that blankets the entire coastline. High above, from the heavy grass-thatched roofs of the timber longhouses, soft columns of pale grey smoke begin to rise, ascending perfectly straight into the windless, freezing air. These gentle plumes look like silent pillars supporting the dark winter sky, signalling to the world that every hearth within the settlement has been rekindled with a new and vital purpose. The flickering light from the small horn-paned windows spills out onto the white drifts outside, painting the snow in long, warm strokes of soft gold and amber. Inside the dwellings, the atmosphere undergoes a profound and comforting transformation. The freshly harvested fish, cleaned with a quiet efficiency by the warmth of the fires, are nestled into large, black iron cauldrons that sit directly upon the glowing birch embers. Soon, the dry, crisp smell of the outdoor frost is completely replaced by a rich, deeply nurturing aroma that fills every corner of the wooden rooms. It is the scent of a warm, simmering broth, a fragrant blend of salt-scented herring, wild roots, dried dill, and leeks that had been preserved from the autumn garden. This simple earthy perfume carries a powerful message of security and comfort, instantly dispelling the lingering chill of the long winter evening. Families gather tightly around the stone hearths, their faces illuminated by the dancing orange flames, as they hold smooth wooden bowls filled with the steaming soup. The sound inside the longhouses is incredibly peaceful. The soft clink of horn spoons against timber, the rhythmic crackle of the burning wood, and the low, contented murmurs of children who no longer feel the shadow of hunger. The warmth of the food spreads through their bodies, bringing a gentle colour back to their weathered cheeks and relaxing muscles that had been tensed against the cold. In this sanctuary of light and nourishment, the great freeze outside ceases to be a terrifying isolation, becoming instead a quiet background that makes the simple shelter of the home feel infinitely more precious and secure. Beyond the glowing boundary of the village longhouses, rising steeply along the sheer granite cliffs of the fjord, stands the ancient northern forest. This vast kingdom of towering Scots pines and dense, dark spruces wraps the bay in a protective emerald-green mantle, acting as a massive wall that shelters the community from the wildest Arctic gales. Now, in the profound depth of this extraordinary winter, the forest has been completely transformed into a silent, living temple of frost. Every ancient branch, every jagged needle, and every groove of the dark, rough bark is laden with an immense burden of heavy, undisturbed snow, turning the trees into grand, white-shrouded figures that stand motionless against the pale winter sky. The stillness within the woods is absolute, a deep and majestic quietude that stretches back for centuries. The wind has dropped to a complete whisper, leaving the air so perfectly calm that the forest feels as though it is holding its breath, observing the tiny human drama unfolding on the ice below. There is no movement among the pines. They stand as silent witnesses to the resilience of Jarl Sigurd and his people. Occasionally, the silence is punctuated by a soft, muffled thump, the sound of an overweighted bough gently releasing its snowy white cushion to the forest floor below, a peaceful reminder of the slow, natural adjustments happening within the landscape. This occasional sound only serves to deepen the surrounding quiet, like a single note played in an empty cathedral. Underneath the thick canopy, the forest floor is a seamless expanse of pure white powder, entirely unmarked by the tracks of man or beast. The deep drifts cover the fallen boulders and old, decaying logs, softening the rough contours of the mountain into smooth, undulating waves of cream and silver. A faint, clean scent of dry resin and frozen pine wood hangs in the freezing air, a subtle perfume that has sustained the coastal clans for generations. Walking through this snow-choked wilderness, one feels a profound sense of safety and timelessness. These trees have weathered 1,000 winters before this one, and their steady, unmoving presence offers a silent reassurance that the earth possesses an infinite capacity to endure, to shelter, and to wait out the longest dark. The deep midnight arrives with a rare, breathtaking clarity that cleanses the northern sky of every lingering haze. High above the sleeping village and the silent, frozen expanse of the fjord, the celestial dome opens up to reveal a wondrous spectacle that has guided the imaginations of the coastal clans since ancient times. Suddenly, without a sound to break the majestic stillness of the winter night, a faint, pale green glow begins to kindle along the northern horizon, pulsing softly like a distant hearth fire burning behind a veil of dark silk. Within minutes, this quiet light expands, rising into the heavens to form a series of grand undulating ribbons of vibrant emerald and soft, smoky violet that dance across the dark canvas of space. The aurora borealis moves with an exquisite slow-motion grace, a silent, shifting ballet of light that twists and folds over itself like silk ribbons caught in a gentle cosmic breeze. The ribbons of colour stretch across the constellations, casting a soft, otherworldly luminescence down upon the frozen earth below. The vast highway of ice covering the fjord absorbs this heavenly display, transforming its smooth slate-grey surface into an immense mirror that glows with a faint, undulating green tint. The longships trapped at the pier and the dark timber frames of the longhouses are softly traced by this celestial light, casting faint, ethereal shadows that move lazily across the pristine white snowdrifts. There is a profound meditative beauty in this marriage of the sky and the frost. The villagers who look out from their doorways watch the display with a quiet, reverent awe, their spirits lifted by the recognition that the universe continues to weave patterns of incredible beauty even in the deepest heart of winter. The air is so crisp and perfectly still that the lights seem almost close enough to touch, a grand canopy of colour that provides a sense of absolute sanctuary to the isolated settlement. The slow, pulsing rhythm of the aurora mirrors the steady, calm heartbeat of the community working beneath it, a reminder that the dark season is not merely a time of endurance, but a period of profound cosmic wonder and peace. Inside the quiet sanctuary of his own longhouse, Jarl Sigurd sits upon a low wooden bench carved from weathered oak, his large frame relaxing into the deep warmth of a thick bear pelt. The great communal harvest on the ice has concluded for the day, and the rest of the village has settled into a peaceful slumber, leaving only the leader awake to keep watch over the dying fire. He leans forward, resting his elbows on his knees, his eyes fixed on the shifting geometry of the hearth. The heavy birch logs have burned down to a magnificent bed of glowing crimson embers that pulse with a steady, comforting heat, casting long, lazy shadows across the timber walls and the ancient shields hanging from the rafters. In this deep midwinter stillness, Sigurd's mind drifts backward through time, contemplating the invisible threads that bind his people to this rugged northern coast. He thinks of his father and his grandfather before him, who had walked these same rocky shores and looked out over the same vast fjord. They too had faced seasons where nature seemed to close its hand tightly around the land, locking away the familiar paths of survival. He realizes that the extraordinary freeze they are experiencing now is not a unique curse, but a rare movement in a grand timeless cycle, a long seasonal dance between the earth, the sky, and the human spirit that requires patience rather than resistance to navigate. The smell of the wood smoke blends with the lingering aroma of the rich fish broth that had nourished his household earlier in the evening, a fragrant testament to their successful adaptation. Sigurd smiles faintly as he listens to the rhythmic, gentle breathing of his family sleeping nearby, their safety secured by the simple willingness to look beneath the ice. He understands that the true strength of his clan does not reside in the sharpness of their iron swords, but in their deep, ancestral capacity to listen to the land and alter their perspective when the world changes around them. The fire gives off one last soft crackle, releasing a tiny wave of golden sparks that floats gracefully up toward the roof opening, a quiet reminder that even the smallest light can comfortably warm the longest night. As the midnight display of the northern lights slowly fades into the deep expanse of space, the landscape of the fjord settles into a unique atmospheric phenomenon known only to the far edges of the world. It is the arrival of the extended winter twilight, that magical, prolonged duration where the sun remains hidden far below the horizon, yet leaves a lingering, ethereal wash of deep indigo, sapphire, and pale cobalt across the sky. In the northern winter, this period does not last for a mere few minutes. It stretches out for hours on end, creating a timeless, dreamlike state where day and night seem to melt together into a single seamless drop of quiet color. The physical world under this soft twilight canopy loses all its harsh lines and sharp angles. The massive snowdrifts that hug the contours of the village longhouses take on a soft luminescent lavender tint, reflecting the sky with a gentle matte-like texture. Out on the open fjord, the grand highway of ice appears as a vast sheet of polished slate, its deep cracks and green-veined fissures glowing faintly from within like sleeping veins of precious stone. There are no shadows during these hours, only a soft, diffused illumination that bathes the entire coastal settlement in a state of absolute equilibrium, where everything exists in perfect, undisturbed harmony with the cold. Time seems to lose all its regular momentum during these twilight hours, stretching out indefinitely like a long, slow breath. The absolute stillness of the air means that not a single flake of snow is disturbed on the heavy branches of the surrounding pines. The entire world feels as though it has been captured inside a pristine glass bead, preserved against the hurried changes of the outside earth. For the sleeping villagers, this atmosphere provides the ultimate sanctuary for rest. It is a space where the mind can let go of the passage of hours and days, sinking deeply into a comforting restorative slumber knowing that the quiet blue world outside will remain exactly as it is, peaceful, steady, and beautifully unchanged. Inside the deep, protective warmth of the village timber cabins, a different kind of quiet industry takes place as the night deepens. While the heavy frost continues to seal the outside world, a few dedicated weavers gather in the central room, lighting thick tallow candles that cast a soft, dancing amber glow against the dark log walls. Spread across their laps are sections of the heavy hemp fishing nets, brought inside to be inspected, strengthened, and repaired after the long hours spent in the grinding currents of the sub-ice sea. The workspace is intensely cozy, smelling of old pine resin, beeswax, and the clean, dry wool of their winter shawls. The primary sound in this dim sanctuary is the steady, rhythmic click of wooden shuttles passing back and forth through the coarse braided twine. This repetitive, wooden cadence is remarkably soft and soothing, perfectly mimicking the gentle patter of the fine snow crystals drifting against the parchment windows outside. The weavers move with an effortless, ancestral grace, their practiced fingers knotting and reweaving the broken fibers without needing to rush. There is no tension in the room. The continuous, predictable movement of the loom acts as a comforting anchor for the mind, translating the physical necessity of repair into a beautiful, meditative ritual. As the candle flames flicker lazily, creating large, soft shadows that sway across the rafters, the steady clicking sound becomes a gentle lullaby for the household sleeping nearby. The work ensures that when the pale morning twilight returns, the tools of the harvest will be perfectly sound, ready to face the dark waters once more. This quiet nocturnal labor serves as a beautiful reminder that the survival of the community relies just as much on the patient, indoor care of the weavers as it does on the physical strength of the ice cutters out on the frozen bay, locking the home in a state of absolute safety and peace. With the continuous abundance flowing from the dark obsidian pools, the attention of the village shifts naturally toward long-term preservation. In the adjoining storehouses lit by the pale, filtered light of the winter afternoon, the elders begin the ancient process of curing the silver harvest. Great wooden troughs carved from solid oak trunks are filled with dense, coarse salt harvested from the sea during the warm summer months. This salt, stored away meticulously for times of scarcity, is now brought forward to fulfill its essential purpose, smelling faintly of the warm sun and dry coastal winds of a past season. The preservation is a quiet, deeply tactile process handled with an unhurried precision. The workers lift each silver-scaled fish from the willow baskets, layer them carefully within the wooden troughs, and cover them completely with the heavy white crystals. The rough texture of the salt makes a soft scratching sound against the skin of the fish and the wood of the troughs, a steady and satisfying rhythm that speaks of security and preparation. There is a profound comfort in this work. Each handful of salt applied is a deliberate action that guarantees food for the months ahead, transforming a volatile, perishable harvest into a permanent anchor against the threat of future famine. As the troughs are packed and sealed with heavy timber lids, a deep sense of accomplishment settles over the storehouses. The air is cool and dry, perfectly conditioned by the surrounding frost to assist in the curing process. The systematic labor creates a silent archive of sustenance, transforming the raw bounty of the sub-ice sea into a reliable shield that will protect every household until the eventual return of the spring thaw. The community moves through the task with a relaxed, confident energy, knowing that their pantry is no longer at the mercy of the changing weather, locking the village in a state of absolute stability and quiet peace. Beyond the bustling workspace of the carved ice squares and the rising smoke of the village longhouses lies the grand, uninterrupted solitude of the outer bay. Here, far from the human sounds of iron chisels and wooden sledges, the frozen fjord expands into a vast, breathtaking vista where the endless white sea meets the pale grey winter sky at the absolute edge of the known world. The boundary between the earth and the heavens becomes beautifully blurred during these long midwinter afternoons, melting together into a singular vast canvas of soft silver, cream, and muted slate that stretches outward into infinity. This sweeping, icy desert is perfectly still, a majestic landscape of undisturbed snow crust that has remained completely untouched by the paths of men or animals since the first hard freeze. The low, diffused rays of the hidden sun kiss the distant horizon, casting a faint, pearlescent glow along the rim of the world, illuminating the massive pressure ridges of ice that look like silent, sculpted waves frozen mid-motion. Looking out over this immense emptiness, the mind is instantly cleansed of its small daily anxieties, drawing a profound sense of scale and peace from the absolute, unyielding quietude that blankets the northern wilderness. The immense scale of this frozen horizon acts as a protective shield, isolating the small community from the chaotic shifts of the outside world and locking them in a quiet, timeless sanctuary of endurance. If this wide, peaceful journey into the ancient winters of the far north continues to bring comfort and a calm space for your mind to rest tonight, please take a soft moment to subscribe to the channel, like this chapter, and share your thoughts in the comments below. The great white horizon stands as an eternal witness to the cycle of the seasons, reminding us that even the vastest cold eventually holds the seed of a quiet, steady peace. Back at the primary workspace on the ice, the atmosphere remains deeply grounded in community and shared labor. As the afternoon light softens into a gentle violet hue, the villagers continue to work side by side around the dark obsidian openings. The sounds here are remarkably quiet, deliberately kept low to respect the profound stillness of the fjord. The conversations that ripple through the group are soft and muffled, spoken in calm, low-register tones that blend seamlessly with the rhythmic creaking of the hemp lines and the distant tapping of iron chisels. Every word spoken is immediately made visible in the freezing air, as the warm breath of the workers rises from their lips to form faint, delicate clouds of white mist. These tiny plumed vapors hover for a brief moment over their fur-lined hoods before drifting lazily upward, dissolving into the pale sky like the smoke from a distant hearth. This gentle visual rhythm connects the workers in an invisible network of shared life and effort. There is no shouting, no hurried commands, and no tension. The language of the ice cutters has become as measured and steady as the physical movements of their bodies. Neighbors who had been separated for weeks by the sudden onset of the Great Freeze now exchange quiet stories of their households, passing news of children, elders, and winter crafts down the line of the ropes. These simple everyday conversations provide an incredible emotional warmth that counters the biting air far better than any heavy wool cloak. Working in such close coordination, with their voices rising together in a soft murmuring chorus, the villagers feel the last remnants of winter isolation melt away, replaced by the profound, comforting reality of a community perfectly united in its purpose and peace. As the thickness of the ice sheet reaches the depth of several stone spans, a remarkable geographical transformation becomes complete across the region. The frozen fjord, which had initially been feared as a terrifying barrier that would lock the village into a state of total isolation, officially transforms into a grand, dependable highway of solid frost. This massive white road now stretches smoothly between the steep granite cliffs, clearing away the dangerous water currents of the past and allowing safe, effortless foot travel between the various isolated coastal settlements that dot the long northern shoreline. For the first time since the heavy snows began, small processions of travelers can be seen moving along this pristine highway, their wide wooden snowshoes and leather boots clicking softly against the hard-packed snow crust. Families from neighboring bays who had been completely cut off from one another since the first hard freeze now traverse the open plain with a slow, relaxed stride, pulling small supply sledges behind them. There are no sudden thaws or treacherous waves to fear. The frost has built a floor so thick and unyielding that it supports the weight of whole communities with absolute safety, turning a seasonal hardship into a beautiful opportunity for reconnection. This newly formed ice road serves as a vital artery of unity and shared survival across the frozen north. Messages of well-being, bundles of dry firewood, and generous portions of the fresh silver harvest are carried back and forth between the settlements, weaving the scattered clans into a single, supportive tapestry of human cooperation. The journey across the open white plain is intensely peaceful, accompanied only by the soft singing hiss of sledge runners cutting through the dry powder. Looking down the long clear path of the fjord, the villagers realize that the winter has not separated them at all. It has merely provided a grander, more stable floor for them to walk together in absolute confidence and peace. As the final light of the sun retreats completely behind the jagged mountain walls, a deep and velvety night falls swiftly over the long highway of the fjord. With the departure of the pale twilight, the cold becomes intensely sharp, dropped into a profound register that causes the dry snow crust to gleam like millions of tiny, fallen stars under the clear sky. Yet there is no malice in this deep freeze. It is an incredibly peaceful structural cold that locks the entire northern world in an absolute, undisturbed stillness that feels as old as the mountains themselves. The active sounds of the daily harvest have completely faded away into the shadows. The iron chisels, the willow baskets, and the wooden sledges are all resting quietly by the shoreline, coated in a fine, protective sheen of crystalline hoarfrost. Not a single breath of wind moves through the deep valleys or stirs the heavy, snow-laden boughs of the ancient pine forests. The atmosphere is so perfectly balanced and quiet that the simple passage of time seems to slow down to a complete crawl, creating a vast, dark sanctuary where the mind can let go of every lingering thought and rest in total harmony with the landscape. Down in the village, the glowing longhouses stand as small, warm islands of life beneath the immense canopy of the midnight sky. The heavy timbers of the walls groan softly as they contract against the sharpening frost outside, a familiar and comforting sound that only emphasizes the absolute security of the indoor hearths. The intense cold outside acts as a silent guardian, freezing the natural world into a state of beautiful, suspended animation and ensuring that the community remains completely unbothered by the chaos of the outside earth. In this space of profound winter stillness, the soul finds its ultimate quietude, drifting easily into a restful slumber protected by the eternal peace of the frost. Pulling the heavy edges of his wolf-skin cloak tighter against his chest, Jarl Sigurd steps out into the crisp midnight air to complete his final rounds of the coastal settlement. His tall, broad figure moves with a slow, deliberate pace down the central snowy path of the village, his thick leather boots making a satisfying rhythmic crunch against the hard frozen crust. The air is perfectly clean and sharp, biting at his exposed cheeks but bringing a wonderful, clear alertness to his mind as he observes the absolute tranquility that has settled over his domain. At each timber dwelling he passes, Sigurd pauses for a quiet moment to look up at the thatched roofline. From every single home, a steady, thin ribbon of pale birch smoke rises straight into the windless, starry sky, a beautiful sign that the hearth fires are being kept alive and warm through the deep freeze. He walks past the heavy log storehouses, checking the massive iron padlocks with his gloved hands, feeling a profound sense of satisfaction. Inside those dark rooms, the deep troughs are packed full with layers of salted herring and cod, providing a massive, unbreakable shield of nourishment that will easily feed every man, woman, and child until the spring returns. Reaching the edge of the rocky bluff that overlooks the frozen fjord, the leader looks out across the grand white highway of ice, sleeping under the stars. The deep, heavy anxiety that had weighed so brutally on his shoulders at the start of this unprecedented winter has vanished completely, replaced by a deep, immovable peace. His people are no longer victims of the cold, they have become its partners, finding abundance and structure within its frozen boundaries. With a quiet smile of gratitude, Sigurd turns back toward his own glowing longhouse, ready to lay down his head in absolute confidence, knowing that his village is completely secure, warm, and resting in perfect peace. After many long weeks of living in perfect harmony with the deep freeze, the first subtle shifts in the seasonal cycle begin to whisper across the northern landscape. One quiet morning, as the villagers gather on the ice sheet to check the nets, the elders look toward the southern horizon and notice a tiny yet profound change in the architecture of the sky. The midday sun, which had spent the last 2 months scraping along the lowest rim of the world as a faint pale ghost, now hangs a fraction higher in the sky, casting its light from a slightly steeper angle. This shift in the solar arc brings no immediate warmth to the skin, nor does it threaten the integrity of their workspace. The massive ice sheet covering the fjord remains incredibly thick, solid and safe, anchoring the village to the deep-sea harvest with the same unyielding strength as before. However, the light itself has altered. It has lost that heavy iron-grey quality of early winter, transforming instead into a soft pearlescent gold that glints with a new, subtle energy off the smooth crystal ridges surrounding the carved ice openings. The appearance of this higher sun acts as a gentle promise from the earth, a quiet reminder that no winter lasts forever and that the natural order of the world is slowly but surely turning back toward the light. The villagers accept this sign with a relaxed, meditative gratitude. There is no rush for the ice to melt, for the frost has been a generous provider to their households, but the promise of the eventual spring brings a light, hopeful atmosphere to the day's labor. The work continues with its familiar, smooth cadence, wrapped in the comforting knowledge that they have successfully bridged the gap between the seasons in absolute security and peace. Down at the snow-covered pier where the village longships remain securely held in the thick embrace of the fjord, the quiet stillness of the season reveals its finest artistry. The heavy wooden hulls constructed from decades-old oak and sealed with thick pine tar are no longer exposed to the crashing salt spray of the open sea. Instead, the prolonged intense cold has transformed the dark timber flanks into a magnificent gallery of microscopic winter structures as the moisture from the frozen bay slowly crystallizes against the cold grain of the wood. Looking closely at the prows of the resting vessels where carved dragon heads stare silently out across the white plain, one can see the intricate geometry woven by the frost. Thousands of tiny needle-like ice crystals have clustered together along the iron rivets and timber seams, forming delicate, hexagonal patterns that resemble complex lace or miniature pine boughs made of pure glass. These frost formations grow with a slow mathematical precision during the long windless nights, expanding outward in elegant, feathery fronds that catch the pale gold of the rising sun and refract it into tiny bursts of rainbow light. There is a profound meditative beauty in these silent structures, which cover the heavy tools of war and exploration in a soft, protective mantle of crystal. The ships which once carried the roaring energy of the clan across the stormy seas now rest in absolute tranquility, their fierce lines softened by the delicate, shifting geometries of the ice. This exquisite decoration serves as a quiet reminder that the cold does not merely freeze, it reshapes, refines, and beautifies everything it touches, locking the harbour in a state of pristine, undisturbed wonder where the mind can lose itself in the infinite patterns of the frost. Beneath the immense, immovable thickness of the frozen fjord, beneath the heavy snowdrifts and the silent gallery of sculpted crystal, a great and invisible truth remains entirely unchanged. Far down in the absolute darkness of the sub-ice sea, the massive weight of the ocean continues to move according to its own ancient internal clock. The constant, unseen heartbeat of the tide flows steadily back and forth through the deep granite channels, completely undisturbed by the howling Arctic blizzards or the intense, sharpening frost that grips the surface world above. This hidden current is the true life force of the northern coast, steady and reliable engine that refuses to be stilled by the deepest winter freeze. It is this perpetual movement that carries the great schools of silver-scaled cod and salt-scented herring directly beneath the carved openings of the village, keeping the waters alive, oxygenated, and rich with nutrients. While the land above appears to be captured in a state of total suspension and death, the sea underneath remains vibrant, active, and endlessly generous, acting as a massive, fluid heart that sustains the human community through the hardest seasons. Reflecting on this constant subterranean rhythm brings a profound sense of safety and grounding to the mind. The villagers have learned to align their daily lives with this unseen heartbeat, letting go of the superficial fears of the surface cold and placing their absolute trust in the deep, enduring abundance of the water. They understand that the freeze is merely a temporary skin, a passing mask worn by a world that remains fundamentally supportive and alive. The steady, quiet flow of the tide underneath provides the ultimate reassurance, locking the entire landscape in a state of timeless stability, nourishment, and absolute peace. gathered around the comforting warmth of the evening fires, with the rich aroma of simmering broth filling the timber rooms. The elders and the young hunters look back on the long path they have walked since the first hard freeze. They remember the initial wave of anxiety that had gripped the settlement when the harbour locked and the white mantle descended over the cliffs. In those early days, the cold had felt like a cruel curse, an unyielding enemy designed to isolate them and drain the life from their community. Now, with their storehouses overflowing with salted fish and their families resting in absolute security, their understanding has transformed completely. They realize that the Great Freeze was not an enemy at all, but a grand and strict teacher. It had forced them to slow down their frantic pace, to lay down their iron weapons, and to listen to the deeper rhythms of the earth. The winter had stripped away the superficial distractions of the warmer months, leaving behind only the core essentials of survival, patience, trust, and absolute cooperation with the elements around them. This deep reflection brings a profound meditative harmony to the longhouse. The villagers no longer view themselves as beings fighting against nature, but as an organic part of the landscape itself, perfectly integrated into the seasonal shift between ice and thaw. The hard frost has taught them that true strength does not lie in trying to bend the world to one's will, but in knowing how to find the abundance hidden beneath its surface. As the embers pulse with a steady low-register heat, a sense of deep, immovable contentment settles over the entire village, locking each household in a state of absolute unity and timeless peace. As the long winter days begin their slow golden extension, the central hearth of Jarl Sigurd's longhouse becomes a classroom of ancestral wisdom. Sitting cross-legged on the thick bear pelts, the young boys and girls of the village listen with wide, reflective eyes as the veteran ice cutters and weavers pass down the newly refined secrets of the sub-ice harvest. This is not a lesson taught with hurried commands, but a slow, oral transmission of knowledge delivered in low, soothing voices that carry the weight and stability of the mountains themselves. The children learn to read the subtle languages of the frost, how to identify the exact shade of deep obsidian ice that promises absolute structural safety, and how to spot the faint, green-veined fissures that indicate the active paths of the hidden currents below. They watch carefully as the elders demonstrate the precise wrist movements needed to slide the long wooden guiding poles smoothly beneath the freezing crust without tangling the hemp lines. This practical craft is systematically woven into the timeless lore and songs of the coastal clans, ensuring that the hard-won lessons of this extraordinary winter will become a permanent part of their cultural identity. There is an immense grounding comfort in this passing of the torch. The younger generation absorbs the knowledge not as a chore, but as a grand inheritance of resilience, understanding that they will one day be the guardians of the fjord. Watching the children's small hands mimic the knots of the fishing nets by the warm light of the fire, Sigurd knows that the true survival of his people has been secured for generations to come. The freeze has not weakened them, it has enriched their heritage, creating an unbroken chain of human adaptability that will remain beautifully locked in the memory of the clan long after the ice has returned to the sea. The great northern coast finally rests in a state of absolute completed harmony as the long winter journey draws to its beautiful drifting conclusion. High above the sleeping village and the endless white highway of the locked fjord, the stars gleam with a soft eternal permanence, casting their steady silver light down upon a community that has found its true anchor within the frost. The story of Jarl Sigurd and his people is no longer a tale of survival against the elements, but a peaceful testament to the quiet, unyielding resilience of the human spirit when it chooses to move in perfect rhythm with the natural cycles of the earth. The entire landscape has become a vast sanctuary of rest. Beneath the heavy snow-shrouded canopy of the ancient pines, across the pristine white plains of the outer bay, and down within the dark, constant heartbeat of the sub-ice sea, an immense and restorative quietude blankets the world. The village longhouses stand warm, secure, and profoundly still, their hearths pulsing with a low, comfortable heat that protects every sleeping mind from the chill outside. The ice has done its work, refining their heritage, securing their future, and proving that even the longest, darkest season carries a deep and beautiful invitation to slow down, to trust, and to rest. Thank you for journeying through the frost, the iron, and the deep obsidian waters with us across this long historical narrative. If this peaceful voyage into the quiet resilience of the ancient North has brought comfort, security, and a calm space for your mind to rest tonight, please take a soft, gentle moment to support the channel. Subscribe to our community, like this final chapter, and leave a warm comment below sharing your favorite moments from the ice. Share this complete story with someone who needs a quiet sanctuary before sleep, and join us next time as we prepare for our next nightly voyage into the forgotten peaceful corners of history. Sleep deeply, let the stillness of the coast envelope you, and may your dreams be filled with absolute peace. The channel History Under Moonlight is a storytelling platform created for entertainment, inspiration, education, and the promotion of relaxation and peaceful sleep. All stories presented on this channel are global historical tales, gently curated and narrated based on themes such as ancient mysteries, forgotten calm, reflective moments of our shared past through time.